everybody, and welcome to the Be Brilliant People podcast with me, your host, Mike Bedford, as part of a new series of podcasts, which I'm calling the Neurospicy Conversations. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by two fantastic guests, Simon and Amanda Cookson. Hi, both of you.
Hello.
Hey, hi there, Mike.
It's great to have you both on the show today. I know we've just done a couple of takes there. We just did a failed take where it didn't record, or just another take, and a few technical hiccups, which is to be expected when you're recording a podcast. But we got there, we got over it, and we're looking forward to having a great conversation and sharing some of Simon and Amanda's personal journey and stories today. Some takeaways. We're going to talk about lots of different things in this conversation related to neurodiversity. And neurospiciness, I think, is kind of the key word I'm looking to bring out today as well. Might not always agree, but that's good if we don't. We're looking forward to having that conversation too. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to my special guests today, Simon and Amanda Cookson. So, over to you two, please, Simon and Amanda. For the benefit of our listeners, tell us who you are and what you do.
Do you like to go first?
Oh, you're always much better at this, mate.
Okay. I'm Simon Cookson. Good afternoon, everybody. And I'm co-founder of Northern Value Creators. And we are a training and coaching company. And what we do is help people master those conversations that really help grow people and grow businesses. So really help people communicate, choose their language, and get the best out of themselves and each other.
And I think our obsession as a company is really around the conversations that you have and how those conversations impact on others and affect your success. So that's why coaching is our main modality for how we work with people.
Oh, amazing. Well, I think you're in the right place then today, because I'm sure I've got lots of things I'd like to pick your brains over about having the right conversations with people, particularly in the space of the workplace when it comes to neurodiversity as well. And some of the conversations that may or indeed may not be happening for whatever reason as well. So I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on that. But yeah, tell me a little bit then. Simon, we've spoken before. We've met. We've had a coffee. We've chatted. I've met Amanda today for the first time. Simon told me all about his wonderful wife and business partner. Tell me a little bit about what interested you then in kind of coming onto this podcast today and having a conversation. What kind of drew you towards me to kind of have this conversation?
I would say probably our family. So we are adoptive parents. Mm-hmm. And when we went through that adoptive journey, we were given a choice about, what sort of things do we want to have in our family? And we were really, really open, because in my family history and family background, I have a brother with severe autism. I have another who's a savant. So absolute genius when it comes to tech. Really doesn't do people at all. We've also got ADHD and all sorts of things. And I think in being parents and going through that journey and experience of raising children with neurodiversity, it's got us to really understand the brain and different ways of thinking. So just to give you a sense of Cookson family life, two gorgeous children, and Eva calls them her letters. So we have got ADHD, sensory processing disorder. We've got ARFID, which is a kind of an eating thing. We've got attachment disorders, demand avoidance, and suspected autism. So there's loads and loads of neurospiciness there that goes on in our everyday. And what we've also discovered, which has been a bit of a challenge and an interesting one for me, is that Simon refers to me as Big Eva, because I think in a lot of the traits that we're starting to see in Eva, there are an awful lot that are reflected in me. So again, some of the struggles that I've had in my career and in the relationships that I've built up, we're starting to see that actually that could be undiagnosed neurodiversity issues. And so that's our kind of a background and our passion. And we're just really excited to share some of our thinking, some of our experiences, and some of the ways that we've helped people who've maybe been overlooked or misjudged because of their neurodiversity, and how learning particular conversational skills has enabled them to really transform the successes that they get within the workplace.
I'm really looking forward to exploring that with you and finding out a bit more background about your Neurospicy family life as well. But indeed, then kind of how that's impacted on you and how that's then impacted on how you approach the work that you do with employers and leaders in the workplace as well. Now, I think we've got lots of things to unpack already so far. I'm curious, just you mentioned then, I think it'd be right to say it's quite common is when parents with neurodivergent children get into the whole space of finding out about their children and learning about kind of neurodivergence and all that, something kind of drops, like almost like a penny drop moment. I kind of recognize this in myself, actually, and some of these things are starting to make a bit more sense. So you said that having that kind of that moment where Simon's able to reflect that back to you, and then you're thinking about that. What's that triggered in you then, in terms of obviously your thought processes and thinking? What questions have you started to ask yourself there then, and what's your thinking now going forwards?
So I've got lots of thoughts. One of them is that because I was quite high functioning as a child, and because I was female, I think there's often an assumption that I was the good one, if that makes sense. I was the normal one in the family. And so I think there's been an awful lot of things where I've struggled in the past, and actually I've been perhaps masking some of my experiences and struggles. And also, though I look fabulous, I'm actually a lady in her 50s.
Indeed you do.
And I think that, I was reflecting about why are things different now, and why am I finding out, yes, some of these behaviors, some of these traits may be mine. And a lot of my clients come to me as well who have just recently been diagnosed in their 40s and 50s with autism or ADHD. And I think that when I was younger, if you had any form of neurodiversity, you were referred to as the weird kid and the strange kid. I think that you were put in the bottom set at school, or you were treated very differently. You were often bullied, and there was nothing really that was positive about being different and being weird. So that need to conform drove more than that acceptance of, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I need. So I think some of it is about embracing, rather than things that frustrate me about myself, to actually start to think, well, no, this is me, this is what I need. So, if my socks feel weird in my shoes, that is going to affect my ability to concentrate all day. If I am overly hot, I will get angry because I don't like feeling sweaty. And that is just sensory issues. So for me, that introspective feeling is very distracting. So I need to feel okay to be okay. Whereas in the past, this would kind of drive you nuts, wouldn't it? So it's just really
tell us,
to have kids who, if there's a seam in their socks, the world's ended. If there are sleeves on my clothes, I cannot wear them. So it's just that way of really embracing, accepting, actually, it's okay to feel this way. And rather than wish that you're something different, it's then, okay, so what do I need? And how can I then work more in a way that gets my optimum rather than my less best self? I mean, you're the least neurospicy in the family.
Yes. Yeah.
So do you want to add anything?
Would you describe yourself as neurotypical then, Simon, do you think?
I think so. Yes. I mean, I think I've never explored it, but I've never felt the need to. I don't think I feel that I function pretty well in that kind of typical kind of
in
space.
Society.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I'm a middle-aged, middle-class white man. Society's kind of built around working for me, and it kind of does. So yes, but I think what's really interesting from that perspective, from that neurotypical perspective, is then working with and parenting children that have a different perspective, and going through that learning journey of, why don't they respond in the way that I was expecting?
Quite a dynamic shift, isn't it?
Yeah, putting it really bluntly, why don't they do what I tell them to do? And that question is like central to a lot of parenting challenges, but it's also massively central to work, You know, because all our clients at some point go, I've told them I've told them to do this thing, whatever it might be, but they're not doing it, and I don't understand why. And I think the journey that we've gone on in our family has really helped us understand that there's a lot going on in the background. So just telling somebody to do something often won't work. And picking why that's the case, and trying to sort of rebuild, how we parent, how we instruct, how we share, all of those sorts of things has sort of really informed everything else.
And I think the things that we've learned, we've then found us so helpful and so relevant to supporting our clients at work, regardless of whether they're neurotypical or neurodivergent, because they can then be more effective communicators.
Yes, and that's key to most things, isn't it? Is asking the questions and being open and authentic when you do that as well, and kind of asking people how they prefer to be communicated with. How would you like to communicate? What can I do to support you so that we can have that open communication? Because it's okay to not just kind of speak like I do and act like I do. I think I'm just interested and curious. I'm just picking back up on that dynamic as well there as well. And just a question for you, Simon, then. How does it feel to be neurotypical in your neurodivergent world?
Sometimes challenging, if I'm being honest, particularly in the family, feeling and this is a role I've given myself. No one has asked me to do this, but feeling that I've got to be the one that holds things together. In the middle of meltdowns, in the middle of, oh my God, my socks feel weird this morning. And therefore I'm going to create a scene. And there's an awful lot of emotion around socks, which should be quite emotionless, in my opinion, scenario, feeling that you've got to kind of be that glue or that kind of safe pair of hands to kind of just keep everything together it can be quite tricky. But as I say, no one's asked me to do that. It is a role that I may be taking on myself, and maybe I don't need to.
Thoughts, Amanda?
I think the thing is more not necessarily about neurodivergence and neurotypical, but the thing I find really hard is quite often when you go into something like parenting or leading, you often use the examples of what you've had before. Right. So how I was parented is 100% not what we can do in our family. And so it's relearning ways of asking, ways of, I guess, creating comfort and safety that doesn't then trigger and activate things. But also the challenge for us as well is that we have two children who are both neurodiverse, but are very differently neurodiverse.
So, that's a good point.
The sensory things that will activate our daughter isn't the same as our son. The behavioural challenges that you've got with one isn't with the other. And so that then has forced us to think really, really carefully about what do we need to do in a way that's going to help our children feel comfortable and be able to do things and not then escalate things into chaos. Because the last thing we want is when dad then comes in and has to kind of, help us all come down from however many thousand feet.
And I think I'm just reflecting on what you're saying as well, and I think quite often perhaps what tends to happen, and that comes back down to, I think you're talking about our experiences earlier on in our lives, our relationships, shaping our worldviews, all this sort of thing, that goes into the workplace, doesn't it, as well? And perhaps, and this is not a critique of all managers, because again, it's just kind of how you shaped your worldview and what you're taught when you go through management school and you become a leader is you just kind of become a neurotypical leader and you kind of follow the same path. Do leaders and managers try to neurotypicalize neurodivergent people perhaps in the workforce as well? And that's again never going to work because of the need for those things that you need to be able to play to your strengths and to be able to, you know, work towards your differences and support you around your challenges, you're not going to be able to become something that you're not either, are you? So how do you think we get around that from your conversations in the workplace? And, you know, I'm restraining myself from giving my views because I'm really keen to hear yours. From your experience of working with leaders in the workplace and managers and teams where this perhaps comes up quite a bit, what are your thoughts on how we can support that kind of mind shift? And I'm really curious, I'm not giving you the answer here because you've already kind of, I think, told me, so I'm not giving any spoilers. Perhaps some of it might come down to that kind of unlearning old behaviors and learning and educating yourself around new behaviors and how different people and different brains might work and function. So therefore you can play to people's strengths. I don't know, what are your thoughts?
I think there's a place to start, which often people that we work with find almost mind-blowing as a concept. And it's a really simple one. And the good place to start is that we all think differently.
Yes.
Yeah, we all have our own model of the world that's been built up from all of our experiences, that creates this meshed map of the world. And that's through this map that we've all got, and all our maps are unique. And I you know, that word's overused these days, but in this context, we really mean unique.
True.
And that is how we experience the world. And if you're trying to lead people, manage people, deliver things through other people, if you don't take into account that we've all got this different model, we all think differently, then you are going to go down that route that you've just talked about, Mike, of, you know, one size fits all, you know, trying to make everybody, you know, think the same and be the same. And you will be really ineffective if you need your people to think. If you need people to be creative, innovative, solve problems, work together, all of these things that are really critical in today's workplace, then you need to start from that place of everybody thinks differently.
And I think I'd add as well that traditionally you were trained in leadership or management techniques and you were told what to do. So here's the model, here's the process that you go through, you know, this is how you need to be assertive and all the rest of it. And actually that model doesn't work now because we have a much greater understanding through the field of neuroscience about how we think differently. And so that sense of I'm going to treat everyone equally is not right. It's about equitably. So there is leading thought around the Neuro Leadership Institute about this differentiated management. So this is who's got the closest relationship with each individual. It's probably the manager. And the manager then works in a bespoke way with each individual in the team to bring out their best performance rather than having I'm going to behave like this to everybody. For some people, oh, that's absolutely brilliant. And for others, it's awful. So I'll share a shame of mine, which is when I was leading a big team. I had someone in the team who everybody liked, and I couldn't understand why people didn't respond to me in that way. And when I asked one of my colleagues, just get me some honest feedback about me and my leadership style, and the feedback I got was that I was Marmite. Some people loved me and responded really well, and some people absolutely hated me. And I think the reason why I found it so difficult was that I had read what good leadership looked like, and I was doing that. And what I hadn't
textbook,
brilliant. And what I hadn't grasped was that for the people that didn't respond to my leadership, it wasn't actually that they hated Amanda Cookson. It was that way of giving out work, giving feedback, because I'm quite direct, didn't land for them, made them feel uncomfortable, and they needed a different approach. But I felt like if I wasn't the same with everybody, I'd be in trouble with HR for treating people unfairly. And it's not the same is fair. It's about what does each individual need to bring out their best. And that was a level of, I think, leadership, maturity and understanding I didn't have, but also we're going back kind of 15 years where this thinking wasn't a part of the language of leadership at that time.
No. And has it really evolved since then? Either in terms of like the leadership models. I know we kind of we certainly opening our minds up more to the possibilities and the awareness and the education in this space. But do you think really the leadership training that managers and new leaders are going through really reflects modern neuroscience and takes into account neuroinclusion in the workplace and how you adapt and become a better leader because you're adapting yourself as well? You're being open. I think for me, just a quick point on vulnerability. I think as a leader, it's really important to be vulnerable as well and to be open. And the leaderships of the past stars would tell you never to do such a thing, right? You don't be open and vulnerable and authentic and all this kind of stuff. They'd see that as just absolute woolly. But now we know that actually by doing that, you're role modeling the right sort of behaviors to create that openness and sense of a culture where people can belong and be themselves as well. Because if I'm vulnerable, if I go, you know what, even if whether I'm neurodivergent or whether I'm neurotypical, I don't have all the answers on this. Actually, I want to support my team. I want to support you as best as I can. But you know what, guys, I don't have the answers to this. So please help me. I want to learn. I might get this wrong. I'm being open about this. I might get it wrong, but I want to learn from you. Help me. And I know that you might not have the answers either. And that's right, because neurodivergent people might not have the answers either. But I think if you put yourself in a really open and vulnerable position, you can certainly help build those bridges and kind of move beyond this fear of having difficult conversations or what's perceived as a difficult conversation with people, and just open yourself up to be vulnerable and say, I want to learn. I don't know the answers. Help me. Sorry, I'm going off on an absolute tangent there. But
you have, but you asked the question, do I think leadership practice and leadership training has changed?
Yeah.
And I think, yes, if you are seeking out neuroscience-based training, because that very much is grounded in evidence-based understanding of how the brain works and what makes people be motivated, engaged, and respond positively, creates that connection. And I think what I like about, because all of our stuff that we do is underpinned by that understanding of neuroscience. It's evidence-based, it's facts-based. When you're working with people about changing their style or delivery, it's not personal. It's not saying, Mike, when you do X, you should do Y. It's more about, Mike, this is how the brain works. If you want to get greater connection with people, this is what you need to do to get their brains to connect more to you. And I think people lean into that. It's much harder to argue against it. So I think people need to look really carefully as to what are they investing in when it comes to training and developing either themselves as leaders or their team and their behaviors.
I think I would add into that in terms of, yes, I think things are changing in a positive direction. I think where the areas in where we've got most distance to travel and where things are at their worst, if you like, is when things get difficult. When things are going well, we're on the happy path. We're solving problems,
sailing down the lazy river, as I like to call it.
Deadlines are achievable, work's going well, business is thriving, everyone's getting on with each other. Then I think a lot of this stuff is much easier for people to adopt and think about, but it has greatest impact when things are difficult. And that's where I think people get scared, because I think it's a lot to do with fear. People get scared of emotion. And what they do is they then fall back on legal HR processes, just doing the best, focusing on delivery rather than, people.
It becomes a performance issue rather than a human issue.
Yes, exactly. Rather than having what you may deem a difficult conversation, you refer somebody to HR and put them on performance management.
Right.
Because that's safer. And I think that's where we've got, if we can move the dial in those scenarios, in those difficult scenarios, when things are challenging, then I think we know we will have achieved an immense amount. Because, people do sometimes talk about the things that we do as a nice to have or idealistic or you're just wanting to create a cozy, safe workplace.
Where people can belong and thrive and all that kind of nonsense.
You don't come to work to have a good time. Why not? Good time can be full of challenge. And you're pushing yourself and you're pushing others. You're developing, you're out of your comfort zone. You're being challenged. You're improving your performance. You see yourself as a work in progress. All of those things can be very challenging and the things that drive businesses forward. But it doesn't mean that you have to be horrible to achieve those things. It's about doing those in a way that is human first. Because people will lean in rather than step back. But two is you get better results.
Right.
Exactly. So if we can extend people's comfort in things like handling emotion, both their own and other people's, handling diversity of thought, leaving behind rigid thinking and rigid processes. If we can get people being comfortable with that agility of thinking and diversity of thinking, then we'll all be better for it.
Yeah, no, I agree. What do you think frightens managers then, or leaders, from having what they might, and I'm not saying it is actually right, this phrase, but having a challenging conversation with someone because of their behaviors or because of they're not meeting a perceived target or deadline, or work's been set and that should be completed? What then is the fear factor for a manager about kind of having those conversations, and how can they move past that?
So when we think about fear, we generally go into 4 different modes. So there's that fight mode. So in a fear of fight could be that either I'm going to be too aggressive and I'm going to upset you and I'm going to get into trouble, or that you're going to be combatant with me and I don't know how to deal with that and I want to avoid conflict. The fear could also be around that sort of flight, that if I have this conversation with you, I'm going to set hairs running, that there's going to be all this kind of activity and stuff done, and it's going to get in the way. I'm too busy for this, there's too much to do, or it's going to just create a muddle. Or there's that kind of fawn and relationship damage. So if I have this difficult conversation with you, Mike, it means that you're no longer going to like me. And so all the things that I've been working on to build up and all the rest of it, are going to get broken. Or that I don't trust my ability to empathetically understand you, where you're coming from, and get this kind of piece of difficult communication to land. And the other thing with fear is that you can move. So this is my default mode. When I'm stressed, I go into withdrawal mode. So I'm kind of like typical tortoise in my shell. It will all blow over, I will tell myself. If I don't need to address this now because it will sort itself out, or it's not such a big deal. It doesn't need to involve me. Other people will deal with it. So there's all sorts of things that go on that stop us from having conversations that we perceive as being
difficult. I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think you've just hit a really important nail on the head. There, it's a lot of this comes down to assumptions, doesn't it, as well? Particularly in the workplace, a lot of decisions are made based on assumptions, aren't they, rather than facts or neuroscience. I think you talked there as well. So there's a huge role there, isn't there, about kind of education and educating the workforce and educating leaders about this. And neuroscience is very much an important part of that as well. So we don't have leadership that's based on assumptions. It's leadership that's actually based on facts as well. And that's not to say that a neurodivergent person might not be a poor performer. They could still be a poor performer and be neurodivergent, but let's stick to the facts first and foremost. Let's do it from an educated, fact-based approach rather than an assumption-based approach that they just don't get it. Because that might not be the case at all.
I agree. And actually, we've got quite a few really lovely examples of where we've been working with leaders to improve the way that they communicate. So I'm obsessed with coaching and that kind of coaching approach of listening and asking questions to build connection. So I was working with a leader who had somebody in her team who was neurodivergent, and they thought that they were quite a slower thinker. So they'd ask them a question, they wouldn't get a response, and then they'd fill all the space. There was no silence. And this person was quite combative, quite difficult, and didn't really get stuff done and they didn't gel.
Yeah.
So the solution was actually in listening more, not filling the gap, giving silence, giving space, and in asking, what can I do to help our conversations be more productive? So I think that in that gathering facts, you don't have to be psychic. You don't have to read a book about, if someone's got ADHD, become an expert in that. You actually need to ask the person with openness and curiosity and kindness from that positive intent. What do I need to do as your colleague, as your leader, as your manager to help bring out the best in you? And then to listen. And if you're not sure, say, right, so you're saying you would like to do X. Tell me more about that. Just make sure I really understand where you're coming from, because I think working from that space, you can't go wrong. Whereas I think what stops people from having these conversations is, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to upset people. I don't want to end up in HR. I don't want to mess the relationship. Ask questions with that positive intent, and then listen. And I think if we did more listening at work, it would be so much better for everyone.
I 100% agree with you. And also add to that is that, and as well as that person that's asking the questions, be prepared to take it on the chin yourself, that you might get some feedback back that actually you need to reflect on and think, actually, you know what, I might have got this wrong. The way I've communicated this, or the way I've approached this, or the way I'm leading is probably not best suited to getting the best out of this person. That's the learning point for me there. If I can take that away, and like you say, I don't need to go read a book on autism or a book on ADHD or dyslexia. I can just go away and reflect on that feedback that I've given for that one-to-one relationship and think, well, how can I make this better for this person? What can I do in terms of being a leader so I can bring this person in, be inclusive, and that we're not having these challenges that aren't actually challenges, that can just be overcome through a conversation and through listening. And then me kind of making those changes as well. So it's being prepared again. I guess that's that vulnerability and being prepared to unlearn and relearn and all that kind of thing, all coming into this conversation as well, isn't it? That you've got to be prepared to change yourself as well. So when you have a conversation with someone, they might tell you things that you don't want to hear too, right? It's holding a mirror up to yourself.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely.
It is about it's coming from that space of seeing yourself as that work in progress. I am not perfect. I've got loads to learn. I'm a work in progress, no matter how expert you are, because we work in, as I say, a lot of kind of quite young tech businesses that are full of really clever experts.
But probably loads of NDs as well.
Quite a few. And it's about joining that expertise with that curiosity to say, I've still got stuff to learn. I can always be on that learning journey. And if you're always on that learning journey, you will then naturally lean in to question asking rather than telling. So you're approaching, conversations that you might think you're not very good at. And that's okay. Because you've got curiosity. How do I get the best from you? How do I understand what you need? Please tell me. I'm curious. And if you're in that space, you can't really say the wrong thing. You can't really do the wrong thing, because you're letting the other person take the lead, and you're being in that curious state of saying, look, tell me, I want to know. I'm really interested by this. And if you can stay in that, no matter what you're talking about or what you're dealing with, then you're going to be starting in a good place.
For me, that's true leadership. I think no matter everything else around it, for me, that's true leadership, is that vulnerability and being prepared to learn and change yourself is what makes a great leader, in my view, my perspective.
I think I'd probably add one more thing that's related to that in terms of leadership, which is about, and it's something we've talked about already, about emotion. And one of our kind of founding values is about how it feels at work is really important. And I think a leader that gets that and does not believe the myth of professional, this myth, you talked earlier, Mike, about leadership based on assumption. I would also amp that up and say leadership based on myth. Is you leave your emotions at the door. Your dog might have died that morning, but you leave your emotions at the door, and you are professional with a capital P. Neuroscience tells us that's a load of old rubbish. You can't leave your emotions at the door. You can try and hide them, but they leak out. And, you know, it's about being comfortable with that emotion and learning to regulate and manage that emotion, both in yourself and in others. That is another key leadership trait.
There's loads of things there that I'm just looking, and are you sorry, Amanda, you wanted to come in there? I've got loads of thoughts emerging in my mind there to share with you. And I think the emotional regulation is really important as well. And a lot of people don't understand about emotional regulation. And my emotions can come out at the most surprising of times, when most least expected, not when the typical expectation of when that emotion might arise or show itself. It might probably won't, but then randomly something quite really off the cuff could trigger those emotions. And if you think about that in a workplace context, that, I guess, for someone who isn't familiar with it, and this comes back to my point about educating everybody in the workforce, is really important, so that people get that. You're like, what's going on here? Oh my God. You know, if that kind of emotional outburst happens, that's fine and that's okay. And we know what to do when that happens as well, to make sure that that person still feels like they belong and don't feel like some kind of freak or weirdo or outcast, you know, in the workplace, because that's the worst thing possible we want to happen. And I think, going back to your point about that kind of not leading on assumptions as well, and that leadership perspective as well, ask. If you're not sure, ask. It sounds like such common sense, doesn't it? But, you know, as my nan used to say, the thing about common sense is it's not very common. Which I think, you know, wise lady. It's still somewhere I still kind of cling on to many of her sayings. You know, it's so true. I think you kind of really nicely linked me in, because I know, Amanda, before we came on air, you talked about some other things that you might want to talk about as well. I'm just mindful of time as well, because we could talk all day as well. But I'm really keen to kind of, I think you mentioned there, Simon, about kind of busting some myths. I think I had came out in that conversation there we were just having. And I think that leads me nicely into, Amanda, what we were talking about around then, thinking about your own perspective as a Neurospicy family, thinking about what you do and everything that we've talked about so far. Then what around some of these myths that are perpetuated in the space of neurodiversity? Then I think you shared off air with me some of them, didn't you, Amanda? Interested to kind of pick up on some of these as well, and how these might then translate into the workplace, and how they might, you know, whether it's intentional or not, might cause a disadvantage for people by perpetuating some of these myths. Over to you.
So there are a couple that spring to mind. So one of them is that people who are neurodiverse don't make great leaders.
Yeah, tell us about that.
They are not good with people.
Right.
Yeah, so they're great at things, great at tech, but they're not good with people.
Not leadership material.
No.
Yes. Lack gravitas.
You know, so like, you know, Bob in the basement could never lead the team, because, you know, his neurospiciness means that he has to be kind of contained around the servers and not be allowed out.
Lock him up in the computer room.
Exactly. And I think that's utter nonsense.
It is.
And that for some neurodiverse people, it's actually about the fact that they haven't had modeled to them ways of communicating that is effective, or that their model of the world doesn't help them unpick and understand what successful communication looks like. So empathy can be trained, and effective communication can be trained. So it's a training issue. It's not a neurodiversity issue. So the next myth that I feel quite passionate about is that neurodiverse people are not emotional, and they don't recognize emotions. They're not very feeling. And I think that is
Do you think that's directed towards a particular type of neurodivergence?
Sometimes I think people just generalize. So this person's a bit neurospicy, therefore they're not going to be particularly empathic. And I think that again is not true. So in some of the clients I've worked with, I would say that for some people, they feel so much that it's incredibly difficult to work out, is that feeling coming from me and it's my feelings, or is that feeling coming from you? And making that separation is really hard. So some of that disconnect is a protection, because the feelings are so much and so intense. I need to look after myself because I don't know where to start once I get into that space. And I think that the ability to demonstrate empathy again is something that can be taught, can be learned. And again, you know, going back to my career, so I was head of customer service, very people focused, and we had emotional intelligence first came in, which again shows my age, and my score was exactly the same as the head of technology, and everybody thought I hadn't understood the exercise because my score was so poor. Me and the head of tech both absolutely bombed the emotional intelligence test. And so to now be a coach and to work with people in terms of empathetic understanding, I've needed to learn an awful lot about how to shape questions, what to look out for in people, how to recognize where my inner dialogue is interfering with the conversation in front of me. And again, I think that empathetic understanding can be learned. So people have been, and know because this is part of the work that we do with clients, you know, they've been overlooked for opportunities, or they've been given really unhelpful feedback, or they've just been dismissed because again they haven't been given the support they need to change the way that they relate to people and communicate with people. They get that connection. And I think our family experience, so one of the really pivotal things that we had is, if you can imagine, we've adopted our second child and we knew that he was likely to be a bit neurospicy, and actually he was incredibly neurospicy and spent a lot of his time just yelling at us and saying we weren't listening and just being challenging. So we had some specialist parenting coaching around non-violent responding, and we learned how to communicate in a way that helped him know we were listening, to the point where we would need to say things like, I hear you screaming. Because that's what he needed. So our communication changed and our children's behavior changed. And we've just taken that up and into work, and we've helped people when their communication changes, their team's communication changes, their team's performance changes. So it's all about learning particular skills and techniques and ways of working, and anyone can do that. And I think my passion would be that the whole myth of there are certain people, let's do air quotes for the people listening, that should never be managers or leaders. And I think, well, one, do they want to do it? And if they do want to do it, why not give them the training and support? And actually, some of the people that you think will make great leaders and managers still need that training and support anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've really touched on some important points there as well. And I think what happens quite often from my conversations in the community, and from my experience personally, and from working with people in the workforce, people just don't feel heard, do they, a lot of the time? And I think it's a really important point, is that people need to feel heard, you know. And I think as well, you know, just to bust that myth even further, some of the most emotional and empathetic people I know are neurospicy as well. They just maybe just don't do it in a neurotypical way. That doesn't mean it's any less so. And I think that's just, again, about refining your thinking about, well, how should that behavior be displayed? You know, it's just displaying it in a different way. And I think we have to recognize that. And that comes right down to celebrating and recognizing difference as well, doesn't it?
Yes.
You know, and I think you mentioned as well, Amanda, before we came on, a little matter of superpowers. Did I hear you talk about? That's something that gets you go, isn't it?
It does.
How's about superpowers? You're telling me I'm not a superhero now?
Well, I think it's more for me that kind of patronizing. Oh, great! You know, you've got a superpower, so your ADHD means that you can think of loads and loads of different ideas at a time, and you can think really fast. La 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 la. And actually, there are other things like focusing on what we're supposed to be doing when there's a zillion things going. My absolute panic, if I'm honest, Amanda, we talked about this thing earlier. Well, I've talked about it. I no longer remember what it is. So thank you for reminding me, because again, that's the way, you know, my brain's off onto the next thing. And I think that quite often people either look for a diverse team, so they'll bring in people to get that kind of diversity, or they've got somebody who is absolutely brilliant at a segment of stuff, but the job description says it also needs this bit. And I think if you really want to unlock the superpowers of the team, being really rigid about the job description says you also need to do this, and sort of forcing people to do these areas where it's not in their wheelhouse, it's not their strengths, it's something that's going to be incredibly difficult for them. I don't see how that then helps. So this sense of, like, oh, Mike, great, you've got all these brilliant powers. Yes, if I want to get the best out of Mike, I need to make sure that the role I give you and the environment I create for you helps those superpowers come into
100%.
being. And I'm not then forcing you to kind of have a dish of kryptonite every day so that they never get to shine.
Kryptonite, there's lots of that around when you're neurodivergent, that's for sure. Kryptonite. And I think whenever you talk about superpowers, again doing the air quotes, you have to recognize that yes, there's going to be times when I'm kind of like, I've got some real strengths that other people just don't have, which should absolutely be valued and played to. But it's what about when I come down as well? What's the support mechanisms that's in place to support me when I come off that cliff and come down the other side? Because it's a sharp drop. And what is the workplace, is the culture, is the environment supportive of that to help pick me back up when I need that as well? It's okay to exploit me when I'm kind of up there and I can do 2 days worth of work in 2 hours. But fair enough. But who's going to pick me up when I need to come back down then when I've done that as well? You can't just then say, well, just carry on and do it again. That's fantastic. So that's exploitation as well of your neurodivergent people as well. So I think it's absolutely right that we need to recognize, and this comes across the whole spectrum. I think this comes across the whole employee journey, doesn't it, about matching people's strengths to really help them to thrive as well. That's perhaps something we don't necessarily do too well.
That one of the things that we like to talk about is a kind of an alternate view of strengths and weaknesses, and this is overdone and underdone qualities. So if you're neurodivergent, you might have certain qualities such as that fast thinking, being able to do that, lots of work in a couple of hours. But it's also having, thinking about, having that reflection and awareness that you would do in, say, partnership with your team or your line manager to think, well, what happens if that's overdone? What are the consequences? You were just talking about there, Mike. What are the consequences?
Well, burnout for a start.
Exactly, if that's overdone. And what are the consequences of underdoing focus, for example? So it's thinking about things on that kind of spectrum and thinking about consequences rather than I'm good at this, I'm bad at that. And moving away from those kind of
playing to the strengths of your team, surely. If I bring us into I was watching this thing on Pep Guardiola, for those who don't know much about kind of football and things like that. But Pep Guardiola is a really successful coach now at Manchester City. For any kind of Manchester City fans out there, I'm a United fan. But there you go. But Pep Guardiola, I can't take it away from him, he's a really successful coach, and he's proved it time and time again. He talks about his philosophy and things like that. What he does is he takes a person-centered human approach to his coaching style, and he plays to people's strengths. They might not be the best in the world, but he knows how to get the best out of them. So he's not going to move the kind of centre forward and play them right back, for example. Do you know what I mean? Because that's not going to get the best out. Yes, there's things they could learn out of that, but their best position where he knows they're going to be the best and he's going to develop and thrive is in that scoring goals, creating opportunities, being up front. It's not a defensive mindset. So it's about recognizing as a coach, as a leader, because as a leader, you are a coach as well. Let's not forget. And it's about bringing that coaching philosophy into your leadership style and recognizing, well, here I have a team. How can I get the best out of my people so that everybody is able to thrive and play to their strengths? And yes, we can develop people in areas as well. Not to say we're never going to develop anyone in any areas, but first and foremost, let's focus on strengths. Must focus on strengths, because when you focus on people's strengths, that's when they really feel that sense of belonging. And you think about that kind of like that loyalty, then they want to stay with you because they feel valued. People don't feel valued when they're not, and when they're underutilized and they're not playing their strengths. You're giving them things that they're just going to struggle with time and time again. I'm not going to want to stay and work for you. I'm not going to kind of give you a good reputational brand message either. It's thinking about the holistic picture, isn't it, as well? And that's your job as a leader, is to make sure that you get the best out of your people. And it's not as black and white as what it once was, that you can just train everybody to do that. That's just not the case anymore. as well. Now we know that we've all different. We've all got different brains and mindsets and strengths and thinking. We've got to learn how to play to that and get the best of that. And that's just applying. So, like going back to Pep Guardiola, that's sports psychology, but bringing that into the workplace and that into, you know, organizational psychology as well. The two are very intersectional as well. So I think that leads me nicely into maybe talking about intersectionality. Amanda, you want to talk about intersectionality?
Yeah. So our view, I think, is that you're much better off taking an intersectional approach to things. So rather than thinking about, you know, what am I going to do for the neurodiverse people in my team? What am I going to do to support the women in my team? What am I going to do to support the older members of my team? What am I going to do to actually take that intersectional approach and think about, what do I need to do to bring out the best in the humans?
Everybody.
Yeah.
In that
There you
everyone.
go.
Yeah,
exactly.
We are all human beings. We are whole people. We come with our history, our experiences, our individual ambitions. And I think if we can start to work with each individual, so it's not just about person-centered coaching, but I think it's about person-centered roles, person-centered work environments. So for every individual human, they are given what they need to thrive and survive. And there might be people thinking, well, Amanda, that's ridiculous. We can't possibly do that.
I hear it all the time. Tell me why, because I hear that, because that challenge comes back to me all the time. Can't possibly do this on a one-to-one basis for everybody. We just don't have the time, capacity, resources. Tell me why. Tell me why you can't do that.
So as a manager, you have one-to-ones anyway with people. So you're spending that time with them individually, and think about the cost of not doing it, of employees who are either underproductive or leave, and the cost of replacing people, of that lost opportunity, lost thinking. So when people feel safe, connected, and are able to thrive at work, they come up with their very best ideas. So the level of not just productivity and how much you do, but the quality of what you're doing is elevated. So I think it's that hidden cost of not doing it, because often in organizations, your busiest expense is your people. So why wouldn't you want to work in a way that brings out the best? And instead of your people being a cost, they become an asset, and they're able to then take the ideas, take the values, take the mission of your organization, and really make that fly and take it to that next level. And to do that, you need to work with humans, not work with generic policies.
Stop thinking about policies first. Think about humans first, and don't do that from the perspective of, this is a nice to have when we're not too busy, or there's plenty of money in the budget, so we're going to do it then. Think about it when times are hardest, because as the example you brought up, you know, Pep Guardiola doesn't manage in the way that he manages because he is nice. He does it because he wants to win.
Right.
Okay, so you do it because it drives performance. And you know, this country, we've got a massive productivity problem. And the narrative around productivity tends to stay in the space of education, so hard skills and getting degrees and all of that stuff, or buying new machines, or having better railways. And I'm not saying those things are not important, but if you miss out the people and how engaged they are, how motivated they are, how much they feel that they belong and can contribute to where they work, if you miss that bit out, you can have all the fast trains that you want going up and down the country, but we will still have a productivity problem.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And listen, I think we could literally talk all day. I said I never knew where this conversation were going to go, and I kind of and Simon, I'm acutely aware, obviously, you know, but you live in a Neurospicy household. How did it feel keeping up with that conversation? Because it jumped around a lot, and when it was quite fast at times, and it kind of moved around and ebbed and flowed, it wasn't linear. How did it feel? Did you feel at times you were kind of thinking and having to catch up, or did you kind of just feel you went with the flow quite well?
I had no problem, because I am quite I'm quite a fluid thinker anyway. And you know, we are both, we're ideas people, we're conceptual people. There's nothing more that we love about running our own business than conversations like this. Our shared weaknesses, although we've we've talked about our differences, but our what we share is that strength around concepts, ideas, solutions, big picture. We also share the weakness of completer finishers, which we are, neither of us are. So we've learned that we've got to buy that in.
Absolutely. And I think that comes back to everything we've talked about as well, isn't it? Recognizing your strengths, but recognizing where there's areas where you don't have them strengths. It's working with people that do, so that you get best end result. Surely that's how you create a fully functional team that kind of gets the best results as well, isn't it? It's not about neurotypical versus neurodivergent. That's a false picture anyway. It's about recognizing all these great strengths and talents that you've got, isn't it? And pulling them all together to get the best end result. Because there's lots of things I can't do. I don't know, there's lots of things that someone else can do, and equally, so on and so forth, until you understand all those great people's skills, pull them together, and hey presto, you've got a team that can perform. And that's where it's out. That's what we're looking to do, isn't it? And they can turn that kind of into your home life, into your work life. That applies. You can put it into both contexts. As we've crossed borders, I think, today, haven't we? We've not just kind of looked in. We've talked a lot about the workplace, but we've talked about your home life. We've talked about some of the skills you use, but those skills are equally transferable, interchangeably between both, I think, as well, aren't they? As well, and there's so many lessons that you can learn from things that go in your home life into the workplace and back as well.
Yeah, that's the premise of our business. That's why we do what we do. That's why we're passionate about what we do, because we learned through our experience of being new parents that just telling people what to do doesn't work. Shouting at them definitely doesn't work. Trying to reason with somebody doesn't work. Laying out a logical argument to a screaming toddler kind of doesn't work, funnily enough. But those scenarios, as you say, are directly transferable to the office. And that shouldn't be surprising, because we're all people. Whether we're 5 or we're 50, we're all people.
And that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about humans at the end of the day. It's about human beings and recognizing that we're all human beings. Maybe somewhere along the lines that gets lost. I don't know how or where, but perhaps it does, because we get so bogged down, don't we, when you think in a home life about everything that's going on and all the challenges and this and that. And then when you go into workplace, policies, processes, how you should behave, how you shouldn't behave, all these things kind of cloud the actual real messages. Well, actually, we're human beings and we've got different needs in order to succeed, right? And when we find what that is, then we can get the best out of ourselves in whatever situation that is. My God, this conversation is fascinating. It could go on for 2 hours at least. But I'm acutely aware that our listeners will not stay with us for that long. And I think we've probably got to the point where we need to wrap it up, guys. I'm really sorry, because I'm just enjoying this conversation so much. But in wrapping it up, what would you say are your final thoughts into people from the context of your experiences as kind of a Neurospicy household? Is there any kind of top tips or advice you'd give to people out there who are equally in a Neurospicy household? Some of the lessons that you've learned, just kind of quickly summarizing, and equally then wrapping up what we've talked about in terms of the workplace context. What would be key takeaways to share with people?
Mine would be about understanding the neuroscience of what's going on. And so really think about brains. And the more you understand how brains work, the more you can use that to inform the way that you communicate and interact with others. And I think the key thing for us was changing the language of our conversations, transformed not only our family experience, but also has helped to then transform the leaders that we work with.
And the thing I would add to that language choice is going back to the listening. I know we've talked about it, but focus on listening. Listening's hard because it's something we do naturally and without thinking. However, to take that listening to the next level, to make sure that the person you're listening to feels heard, number one, and secondly, to make sure that you've understood what they're saying and how they're saying it. That takes practice and skill. So don't underestimate listening, and put effort into practice.
True. Well, thank you so much, both of you. Again, I've really enjoyed our conversation. We're just about getting to an hour's point on our podcast. So yeah, I'm going to wrap it up at that and just again say thank you so much for joining us and for sharing everything so openly as you have. I'm sure our listeners will benefit greatly from listening in on this conversation and getting some takeaways from that and thinking about how they can apply some of this in their own context as well. So thank you again, Simon and Amanda. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast today.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thanks for having us.
So much for the invitation.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And yeah, for all listeners listening out there, that's the end of today's podcast. But please stay tuned and subscribe and follow us for more podcasts coming soon, more Neurospicy conversations where we're going to get into and talk about lots of different things that are happening in the space of neurodiversity, both in the workplace and in people's lives as well. Because for me, this is a holistic conversation as well. So yeah, I look forward to you joining us for more conversations soon. That's all from me. Take care and bye for now.